happy anniversary to you. And you may not know, though, that she actually was the first person of color to fill a full-time position at Kellogg, which then had a staff of 80. So, and obviously, still a rising star, but really rose through many positions at Kellogg over the years, having served as treasurer, vice president for finance, and executive vice president of operations, and now president and CEO. Of course, over the past almost 3 decades, despite, look at how beautiful she is, and very youthful, the foundation has changed in many ways during her tenure. But what really has kept LeJune at Kellogg for so long is her steadfast commitment to the mission of the foundation, which is creating a world in which all children thrive. Under her leadership, the foundation has placed a renewed emphasis on racial equity, community and civic engagement, and leadership development. And they see this as fundamental conditions under which vulnerable children can succeed. And why is LeJune, who heads the Kellogg Foundation that's focusing on racial equity, community, and civic engagement, the keynote speaker at a conference focusing on immigrants and refugees? It is because she totally gets the connections of all these issues and how immigration status plays a huge role in determining the well-being of immigrant children, who constitute a large number of children here in the United States. And under her leadership, the foundation has continued to focus on 4 priority places, which I'm sure she'll talk about: Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, and New Orleans. LeJune, I'm speaking for myself, and I think many in the field, is much admired for being a leader who not only talks about solutions, but who takes a stand and makes things happen. So in terms of taking a stand, I want to take a little quick poll, just by show of hands, because all that technology is a little too much for me to handle. And plus you're eating. So by show of hands, which of your foundations issued a statement in support of the president's executive actions on immigration, the DAPA and expanded DACA programs? Okay, yep, just a handful, and I think a couple of you are from Kellogg. So the point being is that not only did the Kellogg Foundation, one of the only foundations that issued a statement in support of DACA Plus and DAPA, they did it the very next day after the announcement. So how's that for taking a stand? And beyond taking a stand, I'm actually just going to introduce her. You're not going to hear from her. No, I'm just kidding. It's almost done. She's really the kind of leader who's not afraid of failure. I think she'd rather fail at trying something new, disrupt what's going on in the status quo, and then really fail trying to doing the same thing over and over again and not, innovate. And I think for these reasons, she's precisely the kind of philanthropic leader we want to inspire and challenge all of us today, and to see how immigrants and refugee issues can intersect with our own work at our various foundations, as well as the work of our grantee organizations and allies and other stakeholders, public and private sector partners. As we welcome LeJune to the podium, we are going to see a short video on the foundation's work in New Mexico, but we definitely need to give her a rousing round of applause. Welcome, LeJune.
Providing educational programs and services that address priority needs it's really feeding their families. We're very excited that we're able to provide that opportunity, and we're even more excited that we can do it in this context of helping people address community issues in their classes to really create a space for dialogue within the immigrant community, which right now many people are feeling extremely isolated. I think the Kellogg Foundation is aware of where Latino immigrants stand in terms of socioeconomics and the fact that we're lagging behind on pretty much every indicator. And in order for our state to thrive, we can't leave any populations behind. And so addressing the immigrant community is very important. When the family has access to resources and to services, that children do better, the entire family does better, and that this contributes to community well-being.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see all of you. I have to admit that normally when I come to speak at an event, I like to come a few days early so I can sit down and listen and meet everyone, so this can be a really comfortable experience for me up here. But some of you may know that yesterday I was in Flint, and if you know, the president was in Flint yesterday, and he brought many of his cabinet members, and we spoke a lot about the way forward for really recreating that community. But as I was flying here this morning, I thought, you know, even though I was in Flint yesterday, the underlying message of what we talked about in Flint and what you're talking about in these last few days is very, very similar. The president talked about a mindset in this country, a mindset that is not based on one humanity. And you can think about that as it relates to Flint, or you can think about that as it relates to some of the immigrant issues that we're dealing with. And at the core of what I will talk about and what we must change in this nation is this mindset. And I'll get back to that in a minute, but first I'd like to just thank Darren and G-Sir for inviting me to be here this afternoon. And also, thank you for all of the tireless work that you do on behalf of children and families that we all care about in this nation. And you know that the rights of citizenship, and more importantly, the right to be made visible through personhood, is something that must happen in this nation. So it's all of these efforts that really allow us to understand that dignity and justice must prevail, and that mean-spiritedness cannot overtake love and connectedness. And in fact, as long-standing human rights funders, as I can call ourselves in this room, the Kellogg Foundation knows this very deeply. And we know that it is time now that we must be assertive about putting away hateful discussions and ill-conceived belief systems about human value, and not accepting statements that divide us and define us as us versus them. And that we must ensure that all of our communities must fully embrace the constitutional statement of we the people. Now, we all know that term, we the people. Some of you may even remember this song.
Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty. To ourselves and our posterity do ordain.
I'm sure we can sing along with it, at least some of us.
For
I play that song, and I know it's a little old school, but hopefully there are some of you in this room like me who grew up listening to this song every Saturday morning. Every Saturday morning. And because it was such a catchy tune, we sang it all through the week. And we were embedded with this notion of the intention of the Constitution. And we learned that it was to promote the general welfare of all, and that they were intending to create a more perfect union and to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility. And so we know this. We grew up knowing this. It's our mindset, some of us. It's our mindset. You all have this mindset, and so does GSER. But sometimes when I read and watch the news these days, I wonder where the disconnect that we hear today has occurred. I often ask, what country am I in, and how does that create a more perfect union? And it's troubling when I hear policymakers believe that the best way to promote health in this nation is to deny legal immigrant children access to health care. It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder when I hear people who believe that the best thing to do with DACA is to cripple our court system and use it to divide versus unify. And then finally, when I hear people think that the best way to build relationships is to build walls, and as some of my Latino friends have said, Dios mío. That makes me wonder, are we still intentional about creating a more perfect union and ensuring justice for this nation? But I have recently run across a comment that gives me a little bit of hope. And so I know that the work is not all lost, and there's some bright spots. And this particular quote was actually quoted by someone on the presidential campaign. So I'm going to read this quote to you, and I'm going to ask you if you know who made this quote. So this person said, "We need to get back to the central constitutional principle that in America, it is the content of your character that matters, not the color of your skin. That it doesn't matter where you come from, but where you are going. In an America blind to color, that champions the individual, that recognizes merit, there is no room for debate that denigrates certain people based on their heritage or origin. We can secure the border and reform our immigration system without inflammatory rhetoric, without base appeals that divide us based on race, culture, and creed. Let me be crystal clear," he said. "For those of us in Christ, our citizenship is first and foremost in God's kingdom. Our brothers and sisters are those made in the image of God, and our obligation, after loving God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, is to love our neighbors as ourselves, regardless of where they come from. Demeaning people of Hispanic heritage is not just ignorant, it betrays the example of Christ. We can enforce our laws and borders, and we can love all who live within our borders without betraying our values. It is time to elevate our debate from divisive name-calling, from sound bites without solutions, and start discussing how we will make this country better for all." Now, who knows this person? I'm going to look to some of my Texas friends in the audience because you can probably say this verbatim as it was a statement by former Texas Governor and two-time Republican presidential candidate Rick Perry. So there are moments of enlightenment. And a little bit later, I'm going to share with you some work that we're doing in New Mexico. Another one of our Republican friends, Mayor Richard Berry of Albuquerque. And I'll say there again that he gets it at a fundamental level. And what I've come to understand is that when people get it at a very fundamental level, it's because they have a very warm heart. A heart that connects with people as people and not as groups or labels that strip them of their humanity. And I think the work ahead of us is to make sure that we start with the premise that we are all one humanity, and it is because of that that we all are owed our constitutional rights. And I want to say to you that I think the Kellogg Foundation, for the most part, gets it. And I'll share with you some examples of our journey in these efforts. And I'll offer you some highlights of some of the work that we will continue, and to give you maybe a hint of how philanthropy can show up as your partners in this effort. So since 2006, we've been funding issues related to immigration and refugee work. And in fact, just in the last 10 years, we've probably expended close to $54 million in this area. About $20 million of those dollars we've spent in our priority places. And as was mentioned, those places are Mississippi, Michigan, New Mexico, and New Orleans in the United States. And then we also have places of Chiapas and the Yucatan, as well as Haiti in Latin America and the Caribbean. But in addition to our places, we go further. And as we apply our racial equity lens, we lean on some of our anchor institutions, such as the National Council of La Raza and PICO. And with their great wisdom and others, we've expended another $30 million across the nation on these efforts. But let me stop for a minute and dive a little deeper into the work in New Mexico. And I'll start out by just saying, and I'm sure you all agree, that we believe that every child should have the opportunity to live in a safe, healthy, and prosperous environment and life. And a powerful part of that vision for us is keeping families together and preserving their stability in communities. So we know and we can't ignore the direct effects that immigration status has on the well-being and health of children and families. No child should have to live with the crippling fear of losing their parents or having their parents torn apart from them. And unfortunately, this is what I learned is an everyday occurrence for some, almost 7% of New Mexican children every day. That's really troubling to me. And so what you hear is in New Mexico alone, 86% of the children with immigrant parents are U.S. citizens. And now many of those parents, hopefully, will have the opportunity to fairly and diligently pursue a better life for their families through current legislation. But when I visited New Mexico last month and I sat down with Mayor Berry, I found a true intention to make sure that we would pursue these immigrant rights and make sure that those resources would be available in New Mexico for those families. And so we've worked with many people in New Mexico, and we've come up with 9 key areas of focus for our work moving forward. And here are the 9 areas. First, we will invest in DACA registration and workshop activities so that everyone has access and know and trust a system to support their efforts. Second, we will support investments in southern New Mexico. And this is an area that we have cultivated and want to continue to grow. Third, we will build legal services and other infrastructure support. Then we'll improve government provision and student support services. I heard just a heartbreaking story of a college student from New Mexico really explaining the mindset that she had about whether she could go to college. And I had a similar concern, but it wasn't for the reasons that she had concerns about going to college. And it just made me pause to think of, why must someone live in fear in that way, pursuing an opportunity that should be a right of every citizen? Fifth, we're going to create an immigration information clearinghouse. We'll also support organizing leadership development and advocacy among children. Seventh, we're very focused on workforce and small business development. Again, we know that these families must be stable and have security. Eighth, we'll support economic literacy and security. And 9, we're going to increase support for existing investments and expand in all of the promising areas. And hopefully what you hear in these 9 areas is that we are learning that our work, while place-bound and focused, must be comprehensive, that these issues don't live in a vacuum. And in addition to those efforts in New Mexico, we're going to continue to fund similar efforts across this country in these same areas, because it's our intention that everyone inside our borders can grab hold of our Constitution. Additionally, I just want to draw your attention to some of the work that we're doing as it relates to Haiti. And again, this is just so troubling. This crisis is just, it's inhumane at its core. So in 2004, the Dominican Republic issued the new migration law. And this law, which formally considers temporary foreign workers and undocumented immigrant workers as foreigners in transit. So this definition change then effectively meant that children of Haitian immigrants or migrants could no longer access Dominican nationality by virtue of being born in the Dominican Republic. And because there was no automatic access to Haitian nationality, roughly 250,000 people in Haiti and of Haitian descent have been left stateless. They're not recognized by the Dominican Republic or Haiti. And as noted in a recent report from Amnesty International, the retroactive practice of denying citizenship from 1929 on has left as many as 4 generations of Dominicans of Haitian descent without valid documents, and we've turned their children into ghost citizens. So these people now lacking identity papers for work, health care, schooling, or the right to live in either nation, they will be systematically denied the enjoyment of human rights and personhood. So as a foundation, we are directly engaged in this issue, and we recently hosted an event in Washington, D.C. to start a series of conversations that will lead to recommendations in addressing these immediate issues. And toward this end, we'll be increasing our support for local community leaders and their efforts to address this issue, as it is incumbent upon us to work collaboratively across sectors and disciplines to ensure that we are actively addressing these needs of children and shielding them from the harmful effects of inequality. So as I give you these examples, I hope what you hear as a core message is that we must act together on these issues and that we must act now. We must not wait and put our hopes on the future actions of others. We can't wait for people to decide to do the right thing. Instead, we must be mindful of what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has said, that we must act under the fierce urgency of now. And so, as I think about now, and I think about the future of our work, I wanted to also mention to you some work on the horizon, and you've heard some of the earlier announcements related to this work, but we are calling it the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Enterprise. Now, we believe this is the next step in pursuing racial equity. And we think that it will help communities embrace racial healing and uproot conscious and unconscious bias and beliefs in a racial hierarchy. We believe that this effort will be both national as well as community-based, and will engage communities across this nation to think about racial healing as a basis for change efforts. What we learn is, in order to get into a space, an action-oriented space for change, you must first build a solid relationship that's based on personal stories and one's humanity. And that's the starting point for a more transformative conversation about how we create a community and a nation for all of its citizens and residents. Our goal is to address the current inequities, and many of these inequities are linked to this mindset that there is a racial hierarchy. So what you have heard probably all for the last 4 days is many issues that still must be addressed, and hopefully you've heard many solutions on how to address these issues. But the one thing that I know you've discussed is how we are all stronger together. And I have to say, as I think about the concept of stronger together, it reminds me of the conversation we had at the Kellogg Foundation about why we must pull out of North Carolina and take our Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation Summit somewhere other than any place that will put in place policies that are inhumane and ineffective for growing one humanity. We did that with boldness and confidence, and it was the only thing we knew we needed to do. And it's because any issue in this space is our issue. Our work must be broad and inclusive because that's where children live. And that's where we will continue to focus our efforts as we seek to ensure that all children thrive. So I'd just like to close with, again, a quote from Dr. King. And I love this quote. He wrote this on April 16th, 1963, to an extremely nervous group of clergymen while sitting in the Birmingham City Jail. Dr. King was dealing with the clergymen who were increasingly concerned that the cause for civil rights was the right thing to do, but the timing was wrong. So, feeling unconvinced by their arguments, he stated the following: "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." And frankly, that's where I believe we are in this nation. We must demand the rights of every citizen and resident of this country. We must ensure that they will be spared what I believe is a disease of segregation and a belief in a false hierarchy. More and more, I feel that people of ill will have used their time much more wisely than those of us with goodwill. So human progress never rolls on the wheels of inevitability, but it comes through the tireless efforts of all of us who are willing to be creators of the future. And without our hard work, we will also become the allies of social stagnation. It's action that takes us forward. Silence is not an option. So let us all go together and be the change that we want to see in this nation together. Thank you.
For this arrangement.
Okay.
So now is an opportunity for LaJune to engage with all of you. I think she raised a lot of very thought-provoking ideas and would love to, I don't know how people did this before. I don't know if there are mics out there, how to call questions, but as my eyesight gets situated, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, how can philanthropy take some leadership in terms of acting now, acting together, the concept of stronger together, because a lot of foundations operate in silos. How do we connect the dots?
Yes. I think philanthropy is changing in that regard, and I know there's a funders collaborative as it relates to these issues. And I do believe that that's the starting point for collective action within philanthropy. And lately, I've seen philanthropy grow to understand that sometimes the best that we can do at a moment is not to provide resources, but is to take our influence and use that influence to call attention to certain issues. So I would start with the funders collaborative that exists, but then expand beyond that and ask of them, one, what is our collective voice in this conversation? And how might we come together with both dollars and influence? And then how might we bring our colleagues in? And I've been in several collaboratives of different foundations, and what I'm finding is we're learning that we're stronger together as well.
Great, thank you. Did you all hear that? 15 sites, funding collaboratives who are here. We have a little marching order from June. So are there questions from the audience? Oh, right here, Carlos. Sorry. Oh, and one up there, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is
and
James
James,
Gore. I'm
yeah.
with the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for not coming to North Carolina.
Thank you. Thank you for understanding.
But I also think that this, what we're dealing with in our state, which is a complete embarrassment, and as an LGBTQ funder, and as an immigrant funder, and as a social justice and racial justice funder, it's a complete embarrassment. But I also want to talk about this challenge that I feel that we face around an intersectional analysis. Back in October, under very similar circumstances, our legislature put in a very regressive banning of municipal IDs, as well as sanctuary cities. And the response from the business community, the response from the philanthropic community, the response from the social justice community outside of the immigration community was very muted and non-existent. And when we're trying to operate in a system where there is no hierarchy of oppression, yet folks are being left behind and rights and humanity is not being recognized, how do we create a better system and better opportunities for those of us who are working across these sectors to speak across these sectors when we really need to speak out?
Yeah. That's a very good point. And again, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our racial equity work. And in fact, I'm positive that we did fund the effort that you spoke of earlier in North Carolina as well. But one of the things that we envisioned as we were beginning our racial equity work was to bring organizations in the sector who were fighting on these issues together. And we call those our anchor institutions. But it was very intentional to bring those organizations together because we wanted to expand all of their thinking and reach by making sure that we were combining and understanding each issue that each organization may be carrying. And what we found is when we all come together and stand up for any one issue, there's that echo chamber effect in that regard. So this concept of bringing people together and really setting the table for that level of collaboration is, I think, is working really well with our anchor institution. That I think it's something that we need to broaden. And that would, that's something that we should think about as far as how can philanthropy continue to convene in these ways, because what we're finding is that is a strength of philanthropy, to be able to build relationships and bring all of these issues together in one forum. So it's something that we definitely need to continue to work on. And that's just one example of how we can start that.
Good afternoon. I'm Carlos Martinez with the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, also one of the Carolinas and Community Change grantees.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, there you go. So my question is, within your racial healing work that you're doing, how are you engaging younger people in this work, and what has been some of the things that you're excited about that?
I'm most excited about the young people in this work. And we have found younger organizations to fund and be a part of these conversations. We recently met with a young organization specifically working in the My Brother's Keeper space around young males of color. And this group was so powerful. They actually described how, as a collective, they learned that there was going to be this new prison system. I think it was going to be in Philadelphia, but they decided, this young group, that they did not want this new prison system in Philadelphia. And on their own, they protested, they took actions. Not only did they block the prison system from being built, they continued to push to say that we want all of those resources, hundreds of millions of dollars that you were going to spend on this prison system, redeployed to opportunity agendas like education and employment and workforce. And so I just get inspired by those young people and their passion and their commitment. So we're finding younger people to fund. We're looking at leadership, capacity building, and seeking out those who are willing and wanting to continue on this journey. But I just don't think this is going to happen without the younger people.
And do we have time, Felicia, for a couple more questions? Yes, okay, great. And maybe you can help me find, still can't see, but you all look fabulous.
Hi, my name is Rupal Patel. I'm with a private sector company called Renewable Resources Group. And I'm just curious if there is, in the same way that the LGBT rights movement has been able to get companies like Apple and PayPal and other folks to use their market power to defend the rights of LGBT folks. If among the business community and the philanthropic community, if there's opportunities to partner around what we all fundamentally know from a business perspective, right, that the lack of immigration reform is crippling our ability to do business in this country. And philanthropy's sort of acknowledgement that this is also a situation where we can start thinking about ways in which we can voice our displeasure with Congress and the courts and their inability to act on immigration reform. That is just, it's absolutely critical to the U.S. economy.
Yes. Okay, I agree with you. And I want to go back to the Truth and Racial Healing Transformation Enterprise that I spoke of. One of the things that we imagine as this work moves forward is that it will be multi-sectoral. So we are speaking with the business community and beginning to get members of the business community to join in on this effort. And as it goes into local spaces, the design, I think, will include looking at all of the corporate residents in those communities. And then having a conversation in those places about what's relevant for them. So even though it's a very broad healing frame, it's actually intended to be very focused on issues that communities care very deeply about. So I can see very much that an immigration issue will be part of that agenda. And with a multi-sectoral table that will be set for those conversations, I think communities will form around creating action-oriented next steps to address those issues and others. But that is the actual intent of the design, that it will be very inclusive and it's whatever those communities come together and decide will be their first priorities, et cetera. And the healing, I call the healing the scaffolding that's necessary to build that new future. And so while there's the methodology in that space to bring people together so that those relationships are strong enough to hold the tension, the actual work will be around issues like immigration, housing, criminal justice, etc.
One or two more questions? If there are questions, just speak up because I can't really see where anybody is. Can you see anything?
I can see lights.
Okay. Well, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Kellogg's approach to racial equity in terms of how that's experienced differently by African American communities and immigrant communities, could be Latino communities or just communities from all around the world that don't have the same experience as African American communities that have been here for generations and centuries. And how do you balance different approaches but still having the overall vision that you have about racial equity and racial healing?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Our approach to our America Healing work is very much one of inclusion. So we don't get into, whose scars are, deeper than another scar. And it's intentional that we don't allow that divide and conquer mentality to really divide that power base toward building an inclusive future. So one of the things that we've learned in the work is we've, again, started with our anchor institutions and bringing, like, the NAACP together with the National Council of La Raza and EPIP and HIP. But when they all come together and provide that forum where it isn't a competition, but it's a strategy session around how might we uplift all of these issues, it tends to have much better results. And so that's really the underlying methodology of the framework, and it's not for anyone to kind of, share scars, but to create the future. I don't know if that was the answer to your question, but.
Hi there. I have a question for you. Thank you so much for your presentation. So I loved your quote at the end about the oppressor not just granting freedom and justice willingly, and the oppressed having a struggle with it. But I kind of want to press you on that and ask you, because the delineation between the oppressor and the oppressed is not always very clear.
Yeah.
Power is messy. So I'm wondering how you personally define oppressor and oppressed, and more specifically, beyond that definition, like, how do you then conceive of allies within the role of the oppressor in terms of that struggle for the oppressed?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, because this is a very, very complex space, right? So the oppressor and the oppressed is very situational. And it probably can't be defined by, you can even go within a race and begin to see issues of oppressor and oppressed. And so that's extremely complex in that regard. But your question about allies, I think, is where it kind of anchors itself for me, because at the end of the day, if we can build allies for all humanity, we begin to break down some of those beliefs that get into this space around oppressor versus oppressed, and those labels. And we know that's so fluid that at the end of the day, I think the conversation has to be around one humanity. And it allows us to eliminate a little bit of that, those distinctions. But in that space around one humanity and through storytelling, which is another fundamental part of the methodology, what we lift up is stories of one another where people then find the commonality in that and a way forward. And then it breaks down some of these labels and and hierarchies. So you ask an excellent question. We know how complex and fluid this is, but I still believe there's a deeper level of learning about one another that will get us into a space of supporting and being allies for one another and getting away from those frames.
Right. Well, I think that's a really good place to conclude this program. I want to really thank you for making it here from Michigan. Lejeune didn't say, but she arrived here at 11 a.m. this morning when she was supposed to arrive yesterday. So it's been a little bit of you can't tell, unflappable. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and for challenging us to think about. I love this frame of one humanity, and that we're not comparing how deep our scars are, but we're working towards, a greater vision.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And let's give Lejeune a round of applause.